Maybe I've got it now. Welcome, everyone, to the very first 2025 meeting of the Memphis Astronomical Society. Without further ado, we'll dive right into tonight's presentation. This is what we have referred to on many years in the past, either in December or January, as a new telescope seminar. We have at times broken it down to the point of in December we spend a lot of time telling you about what telescopes go by, and then in January, assuming you bought one, we spend a lot of time telling you how to use them and what have you. In all of my 30-something years of being here, there's been maybe one or two people that followed any of that advice and or needed help come January. It's usually later, but not saying it doesn't ever happen, but it doesn't happen often. So anyway, we're going to take a little different tack this year, and because some things have changed, the astronomy hobby is not what it used to be. But I'll not let the Grinch steal Christmas or our hobby. And we'll just go ahead and try to get in here and talk about a few things. So, what I want to cover are some basic types of telescopes, basic types of mounts. I should have rearranged this. Ideas for beginners goes down. I'm going to talk about what to expect from a telescope. Before that, then some ideas for beginner telescopes, and then some ideas about how our hobby is changing, and some new tech and how technology can and probably should drive that, although that'll be a point for contention and argument and opinion. So, we were talking to a few folks before the meeting started, and I started hearing stories about I got started in this in the early 90s. I had a telescope in late 80s, and I heard about a comet that was going to crash into Jupiter, and that got me started. But what we normally do around the MAS is recommend that people buy a good pair of binoculars, right? There's too many telescopes, too many kinds, too many types. I know of very few people that have bought that their first telescope was the telescope. In fact, the truth of the matter is, I don't know of anyone whose very first telescope was the one they probably still use if they're still involved in the hobby. So, binoculars will get you out there so you can start to find stuff when the sky is really dark. And while you go look at other people's telescopes. So this is what I had in the late 80s, and it was a Sears. I think I got it at Sears outlet store. My wife got it for me for Christmas, and I looked at the moon a few times, and the whole equatorial mount thing just seemed like a major pain in the derriere. And I just said, well, okay, whatever. And it wound up in the attic until the early 90s when I heard about a comet that was going to crash into Jupiter. And I thought, well, that's something that's probably a once in a lifetime event, and I want to see it. So I got it back out, started looking at Jupiter, and realized pretty quick that it just wasn't going to cut it. It just wasn't going to be the view I wanted of that once in a lifetime event. So I started buying astronomy magazines. I didn't know anything about a Memphis Astronomical Society. They didn't have a website because I don't think there were websites. Maybe there were, but there weren't many. And so I just I got busy studying about telescopes, and I wound up with this guy. So when in my looking for telescopes, I quickly realized that they come in essentially two varieties. They're long focal length and short focal length, and they're different optical patterns for achieving either one, but long focal length telescopes are for looking at planets, and short focal length telescopes for looking at faint fuzzy objects outside of our solar system. And I was sitting there going, well, that's disgusting. Why have I got to have two telescopes? Why can't I do both? Well, it turns out a company called Parkes made a telescope that did just that. This is a 10-inch HIT, or hybrid imaging technology, Cassegrain Newtonian telescope. So by changing the secondary mirror, which is up at this end of the telescope, it went from being a 10-inch f13 Cassegrain, which is very long focal length, to an f3.5 Newtonian using the focuser on the side by changing that to a diagonal secondary. This telescope was it was in a pawn shop. Who'd have guessed it? And they sold for 8,000 plus new in the early 90s. I bought it and some other stuff and a small trailer to haul it all in for $2,200, and spent the next 2 or 3 years becoming a telescope expert because it was not treated well by its previous owner. and and it took me a little while to figure out collimation and some other things, but I did, and I probably am a collimating expert at this point because of it. I built the extra pier extension for it to get it up. This is us setting up to, and I videotaped a Venus crossing, uh, and so that was a lot of fun, and I did indeed see the black marks on Jupiter a day or two after the comet crashed into it. The night it crashed into it, it was cloudy here, so there was nothing to see, and that's one of the banes of our hobby. But by then, I'm carrying this thing. It weighs, 150 pounds out to dark sky sites, taking an hour to set it up. And I get out there and I suddenly find I can't find squat. All the constellations that I knew from setting this up in my backyard, I couldn't find. There was too many stars. You get out where it's really dark and the constellations will disappear on you. It was like, holy cow. So anyway, I got a good set of star charts and some binoculars and started using those to help me find things and then point my telescope where I wanted to really look. And that held me over for a while until a friend of mine bought this behemoth home from Florida. This is a 13-inch Dob, and it turns out it's got one of the better mirrors in it of all these Coulter telescopes I've ever seen. And I love this thing. I still have it. It's my go-to. A good Dob is, I think everybody ought to have one. I think an 8-inch is fine. It's something you can carry out in the yard, sit down and look. And that's the purpose this one serves for me now. Of course, I'm an electrical engineer, so needless to say, it has attachments, as everything I ever do will get a wire attached to it somehow or another. This is my current telescope. This was, and I'll talk about the technology aspects in a little while, but um, light pollution's gotten to the point where visual observing is just not that much fun. And people were taking pictures that were magazine quality from here in town by being able to use filters and what have you. And so I built a telescope that this thing will point at what I wanted to look at. Within 10 minutes, I've got an image on my iPad I can show you that's full color, high resolution. absolutely gorgeous image, and it's amazing. But you can't get that with a visual observing anymore. That's a little further down the road. That's so. Well, my advice has always been buy binoculars and check everything out. You know, maybe the other thing is spend all the money you can possibly afford, and that way you're committed. Because you'll dive in, you'll learn it, you'll figure it all out, and uh, and it is fun. So let's talk about some vocabulary for a minute. There are some uh, words that are may not be familiar to everyone. Focal length is one. If you've ever played with cameras, you probably have heard of that number. And telescopes, it's essentially the same thing. The focal length of the telescope has everything to do with its field of view, how narrow or wide the field of view is, and where the focus point is. And the bigger the focal length number, the higher the magnification, or the narrower the field of view. And vice versa, the short focal length or wide field of views. Some people refer to that as fast. A fast telescope is going to be a short focal length telescope because it's got a wide field of view and it'll gather more light. And they refer to that as fast, having to do with film development more than anything. Um, Another word that we're going to talk about is the objective, or the diameter of the objective. These are two numbers that are often confused early on. People will think they'll see and that's another thing. Get used to dealing in metric numbers, right? Astronomy stuff's all done in millimeters. So, 2000, let's see, 24, uh, 25, 40, 20, yeah, 25, 40 millimeters is 10 inches, right? 2000 something is about 8 inches. Um, so everything's in millimeters, but there's the millimeters of the diameter of the objective, and then there's the millimeters of the focal length of the camera, or the telescope. And this is true for refractors or reflectors or any of them. So, but the bigger the objective, the higher the resolution. So, big focal length numbers, high magnification, big objective numbers, high resolution. The other thing we'll talk about are the eyepieces, that piece at the other end of the telescope. And often confusing here is that the smaller the number in millimeters on the eyepiece, the higher the magnification. The bigger the number, the wider the field of view, and the lower the magnification. We'll talk about that some more. Then there are in the whole world of optical systems, there are refractors, which are essentially lenses. Any system of lenses uses the feature of light called refraction to get all the parallel lines of rays of light to come to focus at a single point. Reflectors use mirrors to do the same trick. There are reasons for either one. And then mounts come into essentially two categories. There's the ones that are equatorial mounted, which basically means that at least one axis of the mount rotates with the parallel to the center of rotation of the Earth's axis, which makes trying to track stuff across the sky a lot easier, and can be done with a simple clock drive once you get it pointed at it. And the other mount is, of course, an altitude azimuth mount, or basically what you do when you're walking around with a pair of binoculars. You rotate, elevate, and those are fine as well. And in fact, but they have their issues when it comes to tracking and with imaging technologies, although that's going away. All right. So let's look at focal length for just a second. Here's a decent example of what you get. Now, this is all this is from Nikon's website. This is about cameras, right? So you see an 18 millimeter focal length gives you this nice wide field of view and a little bitty uh, red dot down here is a little barn, you know, and the bigger the number, the more you zoom in, so to speak, and you get to 300 millimeters, and you've got a nice picture of that. Whoops, of that barn. Now, what you're not going to do is do this in a telescope. In fact, you're not going to do that with a camera lens. And you're typically going to have to change lenses to get that kind of range, and you'll find that to get a 300 millimeter lens that's that sharp, that far away, has got a big objective, and they get expensive. So there's trade-offs. Optical systems are compromises. I don't care what you're doing. Everything about it's a compromise, including the glasses you wear. All right, objectives. So this is the diameter. This is the main lens. It's either the front lens on a refractor, or it's the big mirror in the back end of a reflector. And this is the light gathering capability. The bigger is better. The more light you can gather, the better the resolution you get. Magnification isn't everything. You can look at ads for some telescopes if they even talk about magnification, you know, 100 times or 1,000 times, 900 power, you know, walk away, because that's not the telescope you want. That's typically a bad combination of small optics and bad eyepieces. Um, they're the uh, there are limits to what you can get decent usable resolution out of. It's called Dawes limit, and do I have a note in here about that? I don't. But you can see that you get an exponential increase in resolution for the diameter of the objective. So, you know, a 2 inch or 3 inch diameter refractor, uh, you get you know, exponentially more resolution in a 6 inch. See, we've seen a 4 inch diameter telescope's good for 200x, 200 power maximum. And that's a good night. So there are a lot of other things that'll affect what the image looks like in your telescope. And that's one of the things I'm going to talk about more in a few minutes. So this is why bigger is better, and probably why those of you that know me know I am a nut for a globular cluster. I love looking at these, and I started that love of looking at these when I got my 13-inch dot and a 9 millimeter Nagler eyepiece, because I can dive into the middle of M13 and get this kind of resolution, and sometimes better. And that's fun. That is worth sitting at the eyepiece for and waiting for the turbulence to settle down and everything else to peer into the center of a globular cluster. So, excuse me, eyepieces. There's a lot of question about eyepieces, especially when you are new and trying to get set up. If you buy a new telescope, it'll come with one, maybe two. Almost all Celestrons and Me's come with a 25 millimeter, but uh, that's uh, that's that's a good workhorse. It's a wide field of view, and it's fine. But this, like I said, my favorite view is my 13-inch with a 9 millimeter Nagler. Now, that eyepiece costs more than most people's telescopes, but that's because I wear glasses. In fact, these are the thinnest glasses I've worn in my life. When I got started in astronomy, I was wearing glasses that were a half inch thick in places, and were it was a miracle I could see, period. And when you wear glasses, astronomy can get expensive because you need eyepieces that have what's called long eye relief. People with normal vision that don't wear glasses can take their glasses off and get up really close to that the hole in the eyepiece and get a good wide field view. I can't. I got to sit back here away from it, so all I get is a little view in the that little hole, and that's a problem. If you need glasses and you don't have an astigmatism, then you don't need glasses for a telescope. You take your glasses off and change the focus because that's all you're wearing glasses for, is your focus isn't the same. But if you want to take your glasses off and change the focus, you can get a sharp in focus view through the telescope by adjusting that. I have a terrible astigmatism. Wouldn't it be my luck? But then that's why I have a bunch of expensive eyepieces. Now, since then, I've had operations on my eyes. I got less astigmatism and less power correction and some other things, and it's a lot better. But I still love my expensive eyepieces. Eyepieces come in a few varieties. As far as I'm concerned, everybody ought to have a set of Plossums, inch and a quarter Plossums. They're good workhorse set of eyepieces. There's all sorts of tricks you can do with them, and eyepiece projection and photography, and all the different adapters and stuff you get for doing that sort of thing work with inch and a quarter eyepieces, and the Plossos are great for that. They're good, middle of the road sort of deal. They're all reasonably good quality. I have a set of Teleview Plossos, uh, but the Meads and Celestrons are fine. Oh, and by the way, Mead and Orion are out of business. Coronado's gone. Celestron's probably not far behind them. It's going to be an interesting world in the future with telescope business, but but that's fine because I don't recommend buying new telescopes anyway. I bought all of mine. Well, I bought one new one, but actually I bought two new ones. Anyway, you can find good gear on the used market for decent discounts. So I don't do zoom eyepieces. I get asked about them. I wouldn't know. My opinion is they're like zoom lenses on my camera. You got to make that zoom function work, you got to add more layers of glass. And through every layer of glass, every junction from one type of glass to the next, you lose light. It's reflected, no light never passes through or reflects off of anything 100%. The best mirror coatings you can get are in the upper 90s, 98 or so. The transmission through most glass is not even quite that good, but you're losing the light as it goes through more elements. And zoom just adds a bunch of elements. I'd rather have different eyepieces. So I've got a 32, a 25, a 16, a 13, a 9, and a 4. And the 4 is completely useless. But I wanted to see what the limit was. So anyway, there's a lot of things to understand about eyepieces. They come in different designs. Um, I have seen Huygens design eyepieces. I've seen a few Kellners. I have an Erfel. I have a set of Plossels. The rest of these I don't know much about. The rest of my pieces are all Teleview Nagler. There's a guy named Al Nagler that was a optics engineer that was for Teleview that is famous for his eyepiece designs, and that's what I've stuck with. So, but there are others out there. There are good values out there. It's just going to take some research. So much for eyepieces. That's my short course on eyepieces. So let's talk about telescopes. Refractors are, like I said, ones that use lenses, not mirrors, and uh, they can come in all kinds of sizes. But they finally did find out what the limit was. The absolute largest refractor telescope that is still in existence, and I think they actually made a 48, but I don't think the lens held up. But this 40-inch refractor at Yerkes Observatory is the largest refractor telescope in the world. It's still operational. And in right now, we're looking at March for a presentation from the people at Yerkes Observatory. So that's our target right now for the March MAS meeting is a presentation about the Yerkes telescope from the people at Yerkes Observatory. That will be a fun presentation. This one is a picture when young Mr. Einstein was there. This is going to be roughly 19, let's see, this is 1921. So he hadn't moved to America yet, I don't think. So he just had to have been here on a visit. Anyway, it's been around a while, but this is the largest refractor in the world. Refractors come in a number of types. There are people that are so bold as to build them with a single lens. Those are garbage. Don't bother. The the closest thing you're going to get to a decent refractor is what's called a achromatic, and they have two lenses, and the two objective lenses will be nested together, and they're made out of two different kinds of glass. And we'll talk about why they do that, but it's called chromatic aberration. And it's the fact that light bends when it goes through glass, but it bends at different frequencies a different amount. So red light, which is a much longer wavelength than blue light, bend at two different places. So the bottom line is they focus at two different places. And in just with one lens, it becomes painfully obvious. With two lenses and a really bright star or a bright planet, you'll get the outside edges of the planet will have either blue or red rings. That is where the light's focusing at different places. Can be a little annoying. The apochromatic is typically three or more objectives, again, different types of glass. So the refractive index of each type of glass is a little different, and the intent is to get all the colors of light to focus at approximately the same point. And some of these do a really, really good job of it, but the better job of it they do is directly proportional to the cost. Some of the best refractors, a top of the line 6-inch refractor is going to cost about $10,000, or used to anyway. Things are changing. So here's the basic idea of chromatic aberration. You can see that red, green, and blue light focuses at different points, And you can see in this picture how it basically looks like it's just not quite in focus. And when it's a star, a bright star or something, the different colors will pop out at you. Uh, Now, there are double refractors, aka binoculars, and all I really want to say about them is, 7 to 10 power. Uh, 50 millimeter objectives is about the smallest thing you want to try to do nighttime work with. That's the diameter of the main lens. 7 to 10 power is about all you can hold steady. Anything more than 10 power, you really need to get it on a tripod or something to hold it steady. So if you're just using them to get out and spot stuff with, good 7 by 50s, 7 by 50 millimeter uh, with BAK4 prisms will typically make good observing binoculars. BAK4 instead of BK7 glass, BAK4 is more transmissive than the BK7. It gets a little brighter. So, all right. Our next type of telescopes are reflectors. And here you can see the one I started with. And there are Dobbs. This is a Dobsonian mount, altitude azimuth. This is an equatorial mount. Equatorial mount. This is a gyroscopic mount and another Dob. And all of these are reflectors. In fact, even the James Webb is a reflector. Once you get over 60 of 40 inches, it's got to be a reflector because mirrors, you can sub. The problem with big objective lenses is they get so thick in the middle and the outside edges are so thin that the outside edges can't support the weight. So mirrors can be supported from behind, so you don't and big mirrors for telescopes were really thick. The big 100-inch mirror I think is about 24 inches thick or so, and that's because they try to get it to hold its shape. They don't do that anymore. We build thin mirrors and use dynamic mounts that can adjust the shape of the mirror. And we can detect that because we know how to build wavefront detectors now. Like I said, the hobby's changing. And all this technology, actually, there's a lot of it spin off from Star Wars. People don't really remember, but a lot of the optical advances that have been made in the last 30, 40 years have really changed how we do astronomy. This is a classical Newtonian reflector here in this picture. There are also Cassegrains and Ritchie-Chrétiens, Stahl-Kirkhams. My black telescope I showed you earlier was a Ritchie-Chrétien. I've never actually looked at a Dahl-Kirkham. I know what it is, but I've never seen one in true life. A Newtonian basically has a mirror at the back end, and this is always hilarious to see uh, on TV where somebody gets a Newtonian telescope and sets it up where they're looking through the eyepiece and got this end of the telescope pointed at something, right? Because that's not how it works. It always makes me laugh. So everything goes down to the mirror, comes back and reflected to a smaller diagonal, and then out the side of the telescope through the eyepiece. And this is Newtonian. Uh, our good friend Mr. Newton figured this out pretty early on and really made building telescopes cheaper. The Cassegrain is a little different. This Cassegrain telescope is the same, not necessarily. Typically, these mirrors are spherically ground, and that's one of the reasons they're inexpensive. And this is a flat mirror. So this is pretty easy to make, pretty cheap. Cassegrain, on the other hand, uses a parabolic primary, and that curve is a little harder to grind, and a hyperbolic secondary to give to reflect everything back through a hole in the center of the telescope. Now, depending on how you design this and the focal length of it all and everything, and where this secondary mirror is, it changes the optical characteristics of this telescope. The central obstruction's one thing. The spider that holds the mirror in place is just like on a Newtonian. It causes diffraction spikes. That's those spikes when a star goes like that. And there are other things. Then there are what's called catadioptrics, and that's where you basically use, and I have a picture of those in here. I will get that. That's a combination of a glass corrector plate and mirrors, and I'm sure we'll get some more on that in a second. Image effects from a central obstruction. This is what I was talking about with the Cassegrain. So this is, let's say, for example, a image through a refractor where you've got no central obstruction. And this is an image where you've got a central obstruction from the secondary mirror, and either a Cassegrain or a Newtonian. And you can see that what it effectively has is impact on resolution. Uh, then there's coma aberration, and this is where stars don't appear as pinpoints. They'll have what might appear to be like a slight comet tail. And there's a number of kinds of coma. Some can come from collimation issues. Others can come from the spherical ground mirror of a Newtonian, and the stars on the outside edges of your wide field of view will have coma like they're trying to fly toward the center of the mirror. So this little uh, tail that it seems to kind of have will go toward the outside edge of the mirror. And that's typically spherical issues. And then, of course, there are diffraction spikes. And, on a really bright light, you're going to get those spikes in there. Some of us like those. Some of us take pictures and they're not there and we add them back. So, but you don't get those with a refractor. All right, so yeah, reflector telescopes. We talked about the central obstruction, the coma, the diffraction spikes, and oh shoot, sorry. And then there's collimation, and most of the time, collimation can make it look like you've got a coma problem. It can it might look like you can't get everything in focus like it should be. Um, and this all has to do with alignment of the optics. You don't typically have much in the way of collimation issues with refractor telescopes, especially good ones. But you can have, and that can get down to the optics, tube extensions, Barlows, eyepieces. When you're putting all that stuff together, if it doesn't fit well and tight and snug, then it might not be exactly on center where it should be. Little things like that can add up to cause image issues and cause you to be unhappy with your results. Collimating a Newtonian has gotten to be pretty simple with some handy laser tools anymore. Um, so it's but you got to learn how to do it, right? So it's not intuitive, and it'll take some practice. We talked about catadioptrics for a minute. This is a typical Schmidt-Cassegrain, something you see a lot of out there. This is a telescope that has a corrector plate to deal with some of the issues with the shape of the mirror. And then the secondary mirror is it is mounted in an adjustable mount. These typically allow you to do collimation at the secondary here. And then there's something that's a little bit less common, but is these are nice telescopes and produce good views. You don't get diffraction spikes with these because you don't have the arms holding secondaries. This is a Maksutov design and with a corrector plate, but the mirror is actually ground onto the corrector plate. And this is a mirrored spot on the corrector plate. It's completely not adjustable. But when these are built well and put together well, it's almost refractor-like imaging. You do get a little bit of effect from the central obstruction, but these are typically pretty long focal length. So is this. This is typically an F10 focal ratio. These are F10 or higher, sometimes shorter, but in a long focal length, if you're looking for something, these aren't bad. I've been tickled with a couple I've had. Anyway, so one of the things that you'll want to learn how to do when you get your telescope is to do star testing to really try to figure out what's going on with it. The best way to do that is to be in an observing session and call me over and I will tell you. Or you can learn about it yourself. The there's something you'll get from going if you'll pay attention to these images. Right down the middle is what a focused image might be of a star. I promise you, you'll never see one that looks like this. Maybe. This is really high magnification showing in this electronically generated simulation. So if you had a really high magnification eyepiece in your telescope and it had good, decent optics, you'd see these kinds of images. Uh, this is perfect focus. What this is showing you is that even with perfect focus, there is no such thing. You're going to get diffraction limited, uh, and this shows you the limitations of the resolution of your telescope. This is a diffraction limited view of this star in perfect focus with good optics. So, but you typically don't magnify it that much, so you're not going to see these extra little rings. But you can start to recognize these patterns that you see when you shift inside focus and outside focus. Here's one that impacts a lot of Newtonians, and it typically has to do with the secondary mirror being pinched in its mount, or even a primary mirror being pinched in its mount. It's called astigmatism. And what will happen is the pattern will kind of take an oblong shape, but as you rack it in and out of focus out of each side, that shape will shift 90 degrees. And that's a sure sign that you've got astigmatism. I do have that on my 13-inch Dob with my 32-inch Urfel eyepiece, which is a fun, cheap eyepiece. But the thing has got astigmatism. And it took me a little while to figure out it was in the eyepiece and not in the telescope. But coma for misalignment. So this would look like something you'd see with bad collimation, maybe. And that's where the stars kind of shift their fringe rings off to one side. Spherical aberration, correction error. Oops, sorry. But you're not going to look for that turn down edge. You're not going to look for that zone. So these are things you'd look for in if you were building. In fact, I think that's where this came from, is an amateur telescope maker's manual. What you're looking for in your mirror, in your primary mirror when you put it together. I think I'm trying to put together some that more show you about what you would see with atmospheric turbulence and stuff. Uh, so that's where I'm going next. What to expect when you buy a telescope? Well, here you go. In fact, we have hypothesized that anytime somebody buys a telescope locally, that it is the root cause of all the clouds we get. I'm thinking somebody bought something nice recently. This is not what you want to look for when you go out at night. So let's talk about what impacts our view through our telescopes, no matter what they are, this day and age. So light pollution's probably the big killer of our hobby. Inner city, Bortle 8, 9 skies, you can't see squat. This is what you got downtown Memphis. Well, maybe not quite that bad. This is probably more like it. Um, you start to get down to suburban skies. You got to get out in Collierville or better to get this. In fact, I'm not sure you can get a hint of the Milky Way even in Collierville. You start to get out to where it's really dark. I think our dark sky site is, I forget what the Bortle number is. Maybe it's a 3. I think it's between 3 and 4. But it's, you don't get this until you go to Hawaii on top of a mountain, or Arizona, or the Chilean mountains, South America, that sort of thing. So the other thing besides the light pollution is the weather. And the weather can make the light pollution worse, and what's often referred to as transparency. Transparency is, for the most part, especially around here, the amount of water vapor that's hanging in the air. And the more water vapor you've got higher in the atmosphere, the more it's going to reflect light from this light dome over here back down at you, even though you've gotten out from under the light dome. So on a not very good transparent night, even though you go out to our dark sky site, you're still going to have light pollution. You still have it anyway, period. But that's it. Yeah, excuse me, I hit stop time. Then there's atmospheric seeing, and this is the turbulence that occurs in the upper atmosphere, and how that is like looking through a pot of boiling water, and it messes up the wave fronts as they're coming through, and then they hit your telescope. And this, of course, is an exaggerated view, although I would say not too much. I mean, I have seen it almost as bad, especially looking at something bright like the moon and what have you. Anything else, though, where it's dim and faint, it's just going to look like it just never gets in focus. That's the other thing. When I was looking at Jupiter in the years ago, when after the comet crashed, I'd sit there in my driveway in East Memphis staring at it for hours, because every now and then it would snap into such sharp focus that it was like, what happened? By the time I thought about it, I couldn't, it was gone. But as you'd sit there ever so often, the atmospheric conditions would be just right that you would get a great clear view. And it was worth the wait. It was worth sitting there for that fleeting moment to catch the sharp view of the planet. I really love doing that. So there are some websites that make this kind of easy, that should become familiar with. Let me start with Astrospheric. All right, this is uh, an astronomy related website. The link is on our webpage. And it's set up to show you the conditions and what they're projected to be over the next few days. And of course, we're currently right here, and you can see by the color, this is the cloud cover band right here. This band through here is the transparency band, and this is the seeing band. So this is about how clear the air is going to be of water vapor, dust, or anything else. And here's the turbulence. And you can see that we're pretty much toast until, I don't know, long in here, Wednesday might be halfway decent. You know, you don't wait for everything to get this color because it just doesn't happen here often enough. So this would be a not bad time to go Wednesday evening, according to this. Seeing's not going to be superb. Transparency will be okay. We'll see. There's another one that if you want to, this we have a link to one of these on our webpage. In fact, let me go here and observing, and if you run down here, here's one of these, for example. And we used to have the one for our dark sky site here, but I don't know where it went. What it'll show you, there's a lot of good information on this guy's website. He does these models, and but he's got good information about cloud cover, transparency, and kinds of things that contribute to it, seeing and what contributes to that, and lots of information. It's worth reading into if you want to find out more about how to tell when it's going to be a decent night of observing. This is for Village Creek, which we do a couple of times a year, but they have a list. This is all the ones within 60 miles of Memphis. This is the one for us. You know, if you want to check out someplace, any place, someplace else, here they are. I mean, there's maps listed for all kinds of places. So anyway, guy's up in Canada, and he's been doing this for a couple of decades. So now let's see how do I get my slideshow back. There you go. All right. All right. So we talked about atmospheric conditions, and let's talk about some local setup conditions. So you saw this squiggly thing right here, and you know this. Anyway, if you've ever been on a hot day and looked down the road or something and see the heat coming off the highway and everything, and how it disturbs all the view behind it, you know what that's about. It's the changing, boiling temperature changes and what have you. Well, this happens right under your telescope. So taking a telescope out on a hot summer day and setting it up in the driveway, ah, not such a good idea. Get off in the grass where it might not be the thermal load in the grass isn't going to be as high as it is in that piece of concrete. Won't take as long to stabilize either. Asphalt's worse because it's black, right? Gravel's almost as big a thermal heat sink as concrete. And then do what I did one time, set up everything and get to looking at a planet and high magnification and go, where is all this wavy heat crap coming from? And then you look up and realize that I'm looking back over the hood of my truck. So that explained that. So then telescope conditions itself, especially with big dobs and what have you, the air inside the telescope, I typically don't expect my big Dob to have a decent view for an hour. I take it out, I set it up, and then I do other stuff while it cools down and becomes temperature stable. I can actually open the back end of mine and leave it open so that air can circulate through it. I probably ought to put a fan on it, but I haven't. Uh, but after an hour and it's stabilized, it's gotten dark enough to find things, then the views are typically pretty good. But you need to wait for the optics to stabilize. Also, in the past, a lot of people thought that the biggest problem with big Dobbs and what have you was tube currents. And as a lot of people started building open truss to Dobsonians and what have you, so you don't have these big tubes. Uh, they they were still having problems with early mirror uh, cooling down issues. And that's when somebody finally figured out that it has to do with the heat coming off the primary mirror and this boundary layer effect you get of the two different densities of air at the actual surface of the mirror. So that's just another good reason to get out there and let everything temperature stabilize. All right. So we try to at least suggest some things for beginners or especially people that are trying to teach their children and what have you. And these were good examples in 2010. I think they're still good examples, and uh, you're probably not going to have Orion or what have you, but somebody's going to be making them. Uh, Skywatcher, I think, is the next brand that's going to be coming. Most of these are going to be Chinese made, but they're fine. And they're inexpensive. But a 6 to 8 inch uh, diameter Dobsonian of some sort. The three that you see here, this I'd love to actually have one of these. It's the old Edmund Scientific Astroscan. It was it's almost a catadioptric. It's not a corrector plate here, but instead of having a spider for the secondary, it's just got a clear piece of glass to hold the secondary mirror. And it's just a nice little tabletop Dob. This is another one that's tabletop Newtonian. And then this is a ground standing model. Uh, this is long focal length. This is going to be short focal length. So that's something to think about again, is whether you really want to look at close-ups on planets or deep sky objects. Uh, Kids, planets. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Get the long focal length, show them the moon, Saturn, Venus, Jupiter, and its moons. If they get interested at that point, then you look at short focal length telescopes. So, but as I have been saying, times they are changing, and there are. I got to tell you, if unless you knew what you wanted and had a mission, I'd say buy an electronic telescope. You can do this in your backyard in Memphis. They have built-in light filters. They compensate for everything. They're smart. They take pictures. You look at the pictures they produce. They'll produce pictures within 5 to 10 minutes of setting them up. Uh, the MAS has one of these, which was one of the very first ones that came out, and I'm still amazed with it. Um, it was expensive. I thought when I first saw the technology hit the market, I thought, okay, so they're doing something funny with to have it pointed where in the right direction, and then they're downloading pictures off the internet and showing you that, right? That is not what they're doing at all. These are superb optical instruments taking really cool pictures, and the astrophotography hobby and techniques have come to the point that they were able to automate all of that stuff and pile it all into a box. This was 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago when this came out. Uh, and since then, and there have been a couple others that came out and do equally as well. Little different designs. One of them actually has an eyepiece, although I don't know I'd waste the money on it. But now this guy, and there are other options. Look, this presentation is actually 2 years ago. So this part of this presentation is. So there are other options out there. This one from ZWO, quite honestly, I have absolutely no use for it. I'm still thinking about buying one just because it's small, it's handy, it it it's $500. And if I had to pick, this one's still better, right? The $4,000 one's still better, but it's not $4,000. It's not $3,500 better. And I these are these produce wonderful images and work really well. They've also got one now called the C Star 30. It's like down around $300. I don't know that I'd do that. I'd probably stick with the 50. But uh, we have a whole nother video. One of our members did a survey of most of the ones that are out on the market right now. So check our YouTube channel if you want to see his assessment of them. But these these are things, especially if you're doing children. We love them for public observing sessions because kids, older adults, everything. I actually take a 42-inch monitor on a stand and a portable power supply and set it out in the grass and use my iPad to transmit pictures from this to it during public observing sessions. And the kids will sit down in front of it and watch it for a while. This is going to engage young people where old-fashioned technology won't, and it's fun and it works. Like I said, where there's light pollution, seeing isn't quite the issue because they do short exposures and they stack the images. You do uh, short, when I started doing astrophotography, you'd sit at an eyepiece for hours trying to keep the telescope guided on a single star while you took an hour-long exposure on 35 millimeter film. You just don't do that anymore. You take short exposures and you electronically stack them together so that you get the net equivalent of an hour's worth of exposure time or 6 hours worth of exposure time in 5-minute frames or even 10 or 15-second frames that you're capturing one at a time and stacking the data up. It's all in the compute power now. So they work wonderfully. It's amazing how well they work. They're astounding technology, and it's really where the hobby is going. This overcomes the light pollution problem. It overcomes a lot of things. Uh, they're not heavy. I'm getting old. Some of my equipment's getting bigger than I want to bother picking up anymore. Uh, but that's neither here nor there. This uh, these are my ideas about telescopes and where it's headed. Yeah, there's a new one, Dwarf Lab. This is another one that's out there. And I think they've got this. There's a Model 2 of this guy out. And that's the end.